Here's what's coming up on Network Africa. Chadian government seeks to boost security along its border with Sudan. China calls on the conflicting parties in Sudan to halt hostilities promptly. Plus, over 30 women abducted by separatists in Cameroon. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. Today we begin in Sudan, where a 7-day ceasefire has brought a long-awaited quietness to local residents from the heavy fighting in the Sudanese capital. Even though sporadic artillery fire could be heard in parts of Khartoum and Omdurman cities in Sudan appeared to be generally in peace. The agreements, which entered into force at 9:45 p.m. local time, was reached at talks in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, after 5 weeks of fierce battles between the Sudanese armed forces and the paramilitary rapid support forces. Mediators appealed for withdrawal of forces from hospitals, resumption of service in public facilities, and facilitation of humanitarian assistance and commodities for those in need. Nevertheless, most shops in downtown Khartoum remain closed. Several cars passed through the streets only once in a while, and few people could be seen outside. Meanwhile, Chad has allocated more land for the relocation of refugees as it grapples with a growing humanitarian crisis triggered by the conflict in Sudan. The city of Borota, one of the main border crossing points, has seen an unprecedented number of Sudanese refugees in recent weeks. At least 25,000 refugees gathered in one informal settlement camp. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says that number has now grown in just 1 week. Various refugee representatives who spoke to the UNHCR's Assistant High Commissioner for Operations, Rafu Mazu, appealed to the agency to help their family members cross over. The government of Chad has said that it has allocated more land for the relocation of the refugees to safer areas.
No, the humanitarian situation I've seen here is very, very preoccupying. This is one place where very close to Sudan, where we're seeing the consequences of the crisis in Sudan. 25,000 people, more than 25,000 people who are here in Borota, dire needs in water, need in healthcare, need in shelter, and we have to race against the rainy season that is coming to provide the assistance that is required.
Meanwhile, the Chadian government says efforts to boost security along its border with Sudan is underway as a growing influx of Sudanese refugees fleeing the fighting is expected. At least one refugee was killed by a rocket strike on a camp for Sudanese refugees in the village of Kufrun on May the 18th. A senior official with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees says so far those who have borne the brunt of the spillover of violence from the conflicts in Sudan are the most vulnerable.
There was a lot of fighting. People were fleeing and crossing over to this side. Some of the attackers fired a rocket at the people who were fleeing. Fortunately, it did not explode. It got lodged into the ground. If it had exploded, it would have caused a lot of damage in this town.
Kufrun, not far away from the border, in a town inside Chad. A few days ago, we had an incident when one refugee was killed. So it is a huge concern that we have.
Meanwhile, a Saudi Arabia-based committee set up to monitor a ceasefire agreed between Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces is in discussions with the United States on how to deal with allegations of ceasefire violations. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller also revealed that in addition to directly speaking with leaders of the groups, Washington has additional tools available to deal with the ceasefire breaches and will not hesitate to use those tools when appropriate.
Obviously seen the reports. The officials on the monitoring mechanism are looking into those reports and continuing to monitor, and we have the ability to, when we see violations of the ceasefire, make those known publicly, as well as engaged with directly with both sides to the conflict. The way we see the monitoring mechanism is and what it can achieve is a couple of different things. One, to identify violations of the ceasefire. Two, to publicly hold accountable the parties for the violations of the ceasefire. And then three, so we have evidence that we can use to privately press the parties. We have had conversations at a number of levels inside this department, both with the top generals and other officials in the SAF and the RSF from the beginning of this conflict, and we'll continue to do that to press them to stop the violence when we see violations of the ceasefire, and also to have conversations with our partners in the region. And then the last thing I will add is that we do have additional tools available to us, and we will not hesitate to use those tools if and when it's appropriate to do so.
And earlier in the week, China called on the conflicting parties in Sudan to hold hostilities promptly and resolve their differences through dialogue so as to bring the country's development back on track. While addressing the Security Council meeting on the situation, China's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Dai Bing, says it has been more than a month since the outbreak of armed conflicts in Sudan and that the casualties have been rising and the humanitarian situation has been deteriorating. According to the UN data, the conflicts have displaced more than 700,000 people, over 200,000 have fled to neighboring countries, and about 25 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. Mr. Dai urged the international community to step up assistance to Sudan and its neighbors to ease the pressure. He also called on both sides of the conflict in Sudan to cease hostilities as soon as possible. Let's talk to Mariama Diallo, VOA Africa correspondent in Nairobi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So it looks like the generals have been able to hold their fire for once. You know, what do you think made this work this time around?
Well, I'm not sure it totally stopped. I'm not sure fighting totally stopped. We've been hearing many reports, including the one from basically the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, who talked about earlier about hearing, obviously, gunfire and clashes being reported in many parts of Khartoum and Omdurman. So that's there. That's what we've been hearing. And also, obviously, calm has been also reported in other areas of Sudan. But I think maybe, you know, Secretary Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, threatening sanctions yesterday, and also along with the monitoring group that was set up after the Jeddah talks recently, talking about the fact that looking into basically the reported ceasefire violations and saying that they will be held accountable, talking also about the fact that they had some other tools. Obviously, they have not extrapolated on what those tools are, but obviously threatening to use those tools if needed. So maybe all that stuff that's been happening in the past few days has had some impact on the two generals.
So do give us an update on what Khartoum, Omdurman, and other places look like now. There is some quiet. You did say it's not entirely so, but is there free civilian movement? For example, are shops open? Are cars moving freely?
I think it's hard to tell, actually. I've been just having kind of conflicting reports and was waiting until the last minute until I get on with you guys to give the latest update on that. But unfortunately, those calls have not come back in. As soon as they come in, I'll make sure to update you guys on that in particular.
So if this truce stays with any length of time, apart from a safe zone for those leaving the country and aid coming in, what would peacekeepers be discussing as the next moves towards lasting peace?
Well, I think there is a lot to do. If this ceasefire holds, I think the first thing that obviously on the table should be about reconstruction. We all know, all of us who have been following this war the past 5 weeks, a lot has happened, a lot has been destroyed. So I would think that reconstruction is first on the list, whether it is just infrastructure, medical facilities, gas stations, supermarkets. There is all those kinds of stuff first. But then moving back to, I would hope that the talk will take them back to where they were back in April before the war started, which was talking about transitioning Sudan into a civilian rule. And basically the talks stalled because of that big question that was about integrating the RSF forces into the Sudanese army. Is that still going to be on the table when they come back, given everything that happened the past few weeks? I'm thinking that's going to be a huge topic. Another topic that they would be looking into, obviously, will have to do with the influx of Sudanese refugees who have fled the country the past 5 weeks. So that's also a huge topic. Are they going to bring them back? Are they coming back right away? Or how are they going to handle that part? And finally, another point I want to make about this question, what to talk about once this truce sticks. It's the civil society. The civil society, the major component of this whole issue of the conflict of getting rid of a leader they didn't want and having basically the revolution, the Sudanese revolution. How are they going to bring them back onto the table? Not even how, they have to be brought back onto the negotiating table. So there's a lot to think about, obviously. I would hope, once this ceasefire sticks.
Right, so let me take you up on one of the issues you first spoke about. Discussions on the table is reconstruction. We do know that, for example, in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, a lot of critical infrastructure was hit. People's homes were shot at, buildings destroyed, electricity, so many things. What's the scale of the restructuring that would take place in Sudan, for instance?
I think it's a great question. And given that the past 5 weeks, people have not been able to obtain a ceasefire, so it's very hard to assess. And I think that's a very good question. And that should be that should go first. How do you assess damage, everything that has happened in the past 5 weeks? Then figure out who's going to pay for the reconstruction? Who's going to help pay for the reconstruction? You mentioned Ukraine, you mentioned, the world, not just Ukraine. As we know, all the countries have been dealing with the post-COVID issues of, kind of trying to support their economies, trying to get out of inflation, things that we've seen so far. So the priorities, I think, will compete certainly as to just the refugee issues. We're talking about how are the host countries handling that? How are they going to have enough money to take care of that? So that's one issue. So think about that now, in addition to all the other issues that the world has. Sudan has to be added onto it, and talk about reconstruction. I can only imagine the work hasn't even started on that front.
And I imagine neighboring countries concerned about security, such as Chad, which is beefing up security on its border because of the large volume of refugees fleeing Sudan. What are the fears being entertained by Chad?
Well, I think Chad's fears are very legitimate, and I'm going to just give a few examples. Our reporter on the ground on the Chadian border just recently reported on the fact that, and I'm going to even look at the report right now to make sure that I have all the facts right. He was on the border and he heard gunfire. He heard explosions, and he witnessed basically bodies, casualties, and even stray bullets coming through the borders from this town that's called Tendelti in Sudan, and it's about 900 meters away. So just think about that's just one eyewitness, but analysts in the region, observers have worried about the clashes, especially in the Darfur region. Basically spilling into some of the neighboring countries, and Chad is probably the one country that has basically 27 entry points from Sudan. I think that's the reason why the Chadian government is beefing up security just to make sure that they're kind of ready if something spills over. And it's not just our reporter. I think at UNHCR, you mentioned it earlier, is also thinking about relocating some of the refugees for security reasons, but also talking about the rainy season is coming and it will be much harder to get aid to them. So trying to relocate them to another camp that's away from the border. So many questions.
Yeah, Mariama, thank you for giving us an update on that situation.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to the program. In Cameroon, officials say separatists in the country's restive northwestern region have kidnapped over 30 women and injured several others. The women were abducted in Big Babanki, a village near the border with Nigeria, for allegedly protesting against the curfew and taxes imposed on them by the separatists. Some of the women were reportedly severely tortured by the heavily armed rebels who frequently kidnap civilians, mostly for ransom. Separatist leader Capo Daniel told the Associated Press that the women were being punished for allowing themselves to be manipulated by Cameroon's government. The military says it has deployed troops to free the women. And Senegalese prosecutor is now calling for a 10-year jail term against the opposition leader Ousmane Sonko on a rape case that has sparked tensions in the West African country. Highly popular among young people, Mr. Sonko has branded the trial of a political plot aimed at scuttling his bid for the 2024 presidency. The trial was adjourned with the decision expected to be handed down on June the 1st, according to the president of the criminal court. The trial resumed after the court rejected pleas by Mr. Sonko and his co-accused for an adjournment after he failed for a second time running to attend the legal showdown. He has been charged with rape and making death threats against an employee of a beauty salon in Dakar. He has said that he went to the salon for a massage for a chronic back pain and denies any assault. His trial opened on May 16, but was immediately adjourned until May the 23rd after he failed to attend. Meanwhile, several private media and online outlets in Guinea have launched a one-day boycott of news in protest at press and internet restrictions by the authorities. The protest was announced after the ruling military shut down 2 radio stations owned by the Afrique Vision Group, limited access to popular websites and social media, and threatened to close any media that undermines national unity. The government has denied any crackdown against Afrique Vision or blocking of the internet. Civilians are now calling upon the government to respect freedom of the press as enshrined in the country's constitution. Thousands of people in Ethiopia's Tigray region have staged protests calling for residents who fled during the recent two-year war to be allowed to return. A peace deal in November ended the fighting between pro-government forces and Tigrayan fighters, but a long-standing land dispute between Tigray and Amhara, which was exacerbated by the conflict, was not resolved. Tigrayans say the presence of Amhara officials is preventing them from returning to their homes. At protests in the cities of Mekele, Adigrat and Shire, they also called for the delivery of humanitarian aid and withdrawal of Amhara forces and Eritrean troops. Last week, the leader of the regional government in Tigray said Eritrean soldiers were still present in the area. In Kenya, British exploration firm Tullow Oil has assumed full ownership of a major Kenyan oil project after its joint venture partners, Canada's Africa Oil Corp and France's Total Energies, pulled out. Africa Oil said it abandoned the project to concentrate on regions with high petroleum potential, while Total said it was considering other options. Each had a 25% stake in the South Loka basins. Total Energies had, at the end of last year, indicated plans to dispose of its stake as doubts lingered on Kenya's ambition to join the League of Oil Exporting Nations. Tullow Oil had last year disclosed plans to exit the project amid funding problems, which are likely to worsen with the exit of its partners. The Namibian health authorities have confirmed the outbreak of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever following the death of a patient in the eastern town of Kobabis last week. The Ministry of Health and Social Services said lab tests confirmed the male patient died from the viral illness. A total of 27 contacts, including 24 health workers, have been identified. Authorities have urged people who may have had direct contact with the patient to report to the nearest facility. The ministry said one confirmed case is considered an outbreak according to the WHO protocols. The disease can be caught from contact with infected blood or tissues from a person or animal. Symptoms then developed quite quickly after a few days, including fever, aches, nausea, and vomiting, and a rash caused by bleeding into the skin. Patients can become severely ill with organ damage, which can be fatal. And 17 people have died in north of Pretoria following a cholera outbreak in the community. The National Institute of Communicable Diseases declared a cholera outbreak in the country in March after 6 cases and 1 fatality were recorded. Addressing members of the media in Hammanskraal on Monday, Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation David Malobo said a formal investigation into the cholera outbreak will be instituted. Our South Africa correspondent Innocent Simosa reports.
This is why Hammanskraal in Pretoria is in the news. 100 people in the area had cholera symptoms in the previous week, and 15 people confirmed dead. Deputy Minister of Water and Sanitation David Malobo says a command center comprising multiple departments, including the police and the South African National Defence Force, has subsequently been established as part of the government's response to the outbreak.
It's not that we wanted to be able to do investigation over investigation. I explained there are 3 systems there. There's a system of Randwater, there's a system of Magalies water, but there's a system that is managed by Tshwane itself. If you look at the 2 systems, because the water that is provided by the water boards, we oversee them. If, let's say, the water was contaminated in the main pipeline from Randwater and Magalies, this incident of this outbreak will be affecting the entire Tshwane.
There is, as we speak, a delegation of deputy ministers that are visiting the area to assess the situation, engage the community and various other stakeholders, and to see what other measures and interventions can government put in place in containing that outbreak. There has been communication warning people about the consumption of water in the area.
Despite government's efforts, the people of Hammanskraal are unhappy. They say the problem did not start today. Julia Rabombo, a resident who survived cholera, shares her experience.
It began last Saturday. I experienced stomach cramps, vomiting, and I felt dizzy most of the time. Then I went to the Jubilee District Hospital. The queue was long and everyone had the same challenge. However, I received my medication. I'm not quite fine now, but I'm grateful to have survived.
40-year-old Sipho Kumalo, not his real name, says they have discussed this matter with local government countless times, but the government has turned a blind eye. He took us around the area.
The first time they knew it was going to happen, they found the structures about to deteriorate. They built new structures on top of the deteriorated structures. They put in new pipes, all from this section of Kanana, Hammanskraal West. When it blocks because of load shedding, when the lights are gone, the pumps can't pump waste. When the lights come back, the pumps get blocked.
Meanwhile, the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, NICD, has ordered all laboratory employees to test patients for cholera if they present a single symptom of the disease. Ultimately, we are here because of poor service delivery. Government failed to provide adequate drinking water for citizens. And now they're telling me that they've lost confidence in government processes. Well, I'm told that later this week, there will be a shutdown here in Hammanskraal. From Pretoria, South Africa, outside the Jubilee District Hospital, Innocent Samosa, Channels Television News.
The program today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.